Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hello and welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. Now, today's kind of a crazy one. I know what I'm getting into here. I'm here with a rock musician, guitar, heavy metal guy, and I am a doctor. So how do these two guys, where do we find our connection and our bond? I'll tell you where. I'm on Twitter a lot, as part of what I do. And I started noticing this guy's really a happy guy. Why is he so happy? Well, he's so joyful. He shows gratitude every day. And I'm like, I like this guy. Let's get him on the podcast to hear his story. He's a carnivore, and I'll let him tell a little bit of the story, but basically he's a carnivore, and then his whole life changed. He struggled his whole life with depression, anxiety, stress, and all this kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden it changes. And I told him on the podcast, and those of you interested, I know it's episode number 90 on Low Carb MD. It's worthwhile to go back and listen to that, to hear that side of the story, but I want to get more in depth into that, because I told him at the time, I remember, I said, was this a spiritual thing when you had this conversion of happiness and joy and peace? And he said, no, this was like a dietary thing and it was legit, but he also has a spiritual side. So I want to hear the whole story now, and hopefully that entices you enough. Brett Lloyd, welcome. Stickman Bleeding for people on Twitter who follow him.
Thank you so much, Brian, for that kind introduction. It's really great to see you and talk to you. I enjoyed our conversation so much the last time, and I've listened to every episode I can of the Low Carb MD podcast. And when I heard Christine on the Life's Best Medicine podcast share her story, I was like, then God started tapping me on the back of the head rather forcefully, saying, you need to get in touch with Brian and you need to hurry up or this is going to become painful. And yeah, it's so great to be here.
I've done that too, where I keep putting, this podcast was the same thing. I kept putting it off. I go, no, I'm going to fly under the radar. I'm not saying it. And God kept saying, you're going to do this. I'm not going to do this. You're going to do this. And then it just kept bugging me. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. Let me get a studio. No, just do it. Just here I am in my office. It's funny. It's funny. Anyone who sees the video, if we ever release it, is behind me is all my diplomas and my family and all with those kind of things. And behind you is all kinds of electric guitars and cool stuff, man. I'm like, man, I'm jealous. You got the better deal than me. But maybe not. Those guitars are expensive, I know. But yeah, tell your story.
Not my guitars, or I wouldn't have them if they were expensive. And I just have to correct one thing. I don't do heavy metal. I do blues and progressive rock and rock, symphonic rock. Metal is a different thing that I'm not qualified to play.
Come on, man. I was messing with people to make it more exciting, but yeah. But hey, man, the blues, I'll tell you one, as a quick aside, you got to look up this guy. His name is Brushy One String.
I know of him. He's awesome.
He has one string on his guitar. Anyone who's listening, listen to this guy, man. My friend showed it to me. I'm like, this is crazy. But he has some stuff, and it's just great. I love it because it reminded me of when I'm in the third world and the happiness and the joy you see, and he's just playing at this market. It's called Rise Up, I think is the name of the song. It's worth watching on YouTube. But you see, he just starts playing and all these people are so happy and they're dancing and it's spontaneous and it's not like a stage thing. So, and that's awesome.
The joy is real. It's not, you can't fake joy. You can fake a smile, but you can't fake joy. Joy comes through the eyes, not in the grin on your face. And that is, I've seen that video. That man's blessed with some beautiful music that God has put inside him. I'm so happy he was able to get it out.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I was looking at his story, and there's actually a video on YouTube that he tells it. He goes, one day God woke me up, goes, you're going to play one string on your guitar and go and bless a lot of people. I was like, seriously, like, that's kind of crazy, like one string on your guitar. But you hear him playing, it sounds like he's got a whole orchestra. It's just incredible the gift he has. So, and I know you have that gift too. So yeah, I love the style of music you're doing and everything. But tell people your story. Tell them the background and how you got to, your journey is unbelievable, and where you got to be where you are now, because the person you were a few years ago is not the person you are now. I can guarantee you that.
That is most certainly true, and thank God for that. I've been thinking how to formulate this, and I'll do the health thing in sort of a Reader's Digest version, and then we can go back and touch on the faith issues and expound upon them. unless you find questions in the middle of what I'm saying, and we'll just go wherever it takes us. I was raised in a lower middle income home standard. There was 4 of us. My mom and dad had an enormous vegetable garden. We had fresh vegetables year round. Plenty of meat. We were, standard American diet by the book. And my mom was very much a faithful woman. She was raised me and my sister in the Church of Christ, Protestant faith. My dad lived a different kind of life at that time. He never went to church. Now, he would talk about church, but he wasn't interested in going. And I don't want to pile on to him too hard because he passed away in April of 2020. But he was not. I had 2 influences. I had the light of Christ on one side, and then I had some darkness that I was raised in. I'm not malevolence, but just darkness, because he turned out to be as mentally ill as I always was. It just manifested itself a little differently. He could be more socially acceptable than I could. Fast forward through to I'm 15, and I know now by looking over my shoulder, that's when I started experiencing mental illness symptoms. That's when the sleep disruption started. And that was when my mood was low, and I was an angry, angry young man all the time. Of course, now I know it was because my brain was inflamed, but this, when I was 15, you're talking 1976, there wasn't any low carb, keto, brain inflammation contributes to mental illness. There was none of that talk going on, and definitely not in the school system. But I was voted class grouch in high school, and I remember being really offended. And then it was years later, I was like, no, I deserved that. I really did, because I was not a weepy, depressed person. I was an angry, depressed person. I was never satisfied. I was very quick to create delusions like, hey, Dr. Brian, this coffee cup I've got here, I knew that if I got it, my life would improve. And I'd get the coffee cup, and I'd be elated for about 10 seconds, and then I would start finding all the flaws and things that were wrong with that coffee cup. And then my elation turned directly into rage, anger, and despair. And it was kind of a theme for most of my adult life.
And a lot of people, Brett, you're not the only one. A lot of people think, hey, when I get that new car, if I get that new wife, if I get that new girlfriend, if I get the new shoes, if I get the new pants or whatever, the cool phone, I'll be happy. And when you're empty, you're never going to be happy. That's why you have these rock stars and movie stars and multimillionaires kill themselves. And you think, what the heck happened? They had everything, but they were empty. And people don't realize that, and I think that's a huge part of it too.
And through this time, I was active growing up in the youth groups in church. Went to church camp, had so much. I remember, I look back at church camp as the most fun I probably ever had growing up. It was just a beautiful experience. And even one year I got shocked. They always gave out for the boys and the girls, because they segregated them, because there's a difference between men and women. Brian, are you aware of that? And
in med school, I studied that.
Yeah, we're not all the same, it turns out. And they always pick a camper of the week who won a free week the next summer. And then there was always a runner-up. Well, I was runner-up one year. My mom thought that was the greatest thing, that her son, who had been behaving so erratically for so many years, won that. And church camp was a blast. That's the one thing in my youth I miss. It was so much fun, and we learned so much. But through my 20, I went to school. Well, let me back up. There was an event, a series of
Let me
events.
ask you one question. Let me ask you one
Sure.
question before we move on, because it's bugging me a little bit.
Go ahead.
You're winning these things at church camp, but you're the grump at school. How do you connect those two things? How do they see you differently at camp than they saw you at school?
I think it's due to the environment. because I did not grow up in a happy home. There was, dad drank. He was never physically abusive. I never was spanked that I didn't deserve it and understand why it was happening. But he was verbally abusive, and he was manipulative in very destructive ways. He was very belittling. He thought it was, you remember the old Sanford and Son show. Well, he thought it was really funny that Fred called Lamont dummy. Well, guess who the big dummy was at our house? Moi.
Yeah.
And, you hear that long enough, you start believing it. And you start acting like it's true. And you behave like it's true. And that's not a recipe for happiness, I assure you, or success at much of anything. And what it created was, whatever I threw myself into, I could get so far and have some success, and then I would sabotage and ruin it. But in my late teens, I was actually teaching a Sunday school class. They were 4th and 5th graders. But I was also, that was on Sundays. And then the rest of the time I was doing whatever I wanted. I had one foot in the light and one foot in darkness. And at a bowling alley, me and a buddy were bowling and drinking beer. We were legal. We weren't breaking any laws. We weren't being rowdy or anything. And down at the other end of the bowling alley, Brian, there was a group of elders and deacons from my church, and they were bowling. And they were drinking beer, and I didn't think anything of it. But the following week, I had somebody who was a relative, whose name I won't mention because I don't want to disrespect them in any way and create a family ruckus, came to me and called me on that. I'm like, wait a minute. You're getting on me for being a Sunday school teacher, drinking some beer at a bowling alley with a friend of mine, and you're not, and the elders and the deacons get to do it too? Forget this, I'm out of here. And I stopped going to church literally at that moment. The hypocrisy infuriated me. Of course, Satan had laid the trap, and I fell into it. I realize that now. But I became, at that point, an Orthodox hedonist.
Yeah, because you saw the hypocrisy, and that there's not an equal application of the law, and I think a lot of us don't like that. And the other thing is, you were struggling with going to church and doing the right thing, and then doing what you wanted to do the rest of the week, which is very, very common in the Christian church, and that's why a lot of people don't like us too, right? So I think
Sure.
there's a lot of truth, and the other big point of that is legalism, right? Because when you say, hey, you can't do this, and so when you make it about rules and legalism, and you forget the heart of what we're doing, right? And speaking to you out of love and saying, hey, have you thought that maybe if some of the kids were there, it might give them a bad impression, whatever it is, or if you were acting out and caught being a jerk, then obviously that makes sense. So I think it's the way we all view those things, but we can justify what we do also and just say, okay, everyone else is doing this, so why can't I? And I think, and that's the thing is, we all kind of go through those things in life, and we really have to love each other through those things, right? And not have judgment.
Well, looking back, I can see that Satan laid a trap for me, and I jumped in it and did the reactive thing. That's something that as a carnivore would never happen now, because I'm not a reactive person today because I'm no longer mentally ill. I'm very responsive and thoughtful about how I'm going to respond to things. But so from the age of 20 to 32-ish, I was a hedonistic, a pleasure-seeking, lying, barely sociably acceptable human being who still managed to somehow get married. And I was able to work started out not as a musician, though I always wanted to be a musician. I started out working in the psych field. And I used to have a name tag, Brett Lloyd, psychiatric technician. Working at Watauga Area Mental Health Center in Johnson City, Tennessee was my first job, literally my first job in the field. And I'm there on the floor talking to patients every day. I really loved the work, and I was told I was pretty good at it. And I had a lot of cards and letters from patients saying they really appreciated the help I provided. But I was a nightmare out of work. It was, again, the same thing. There's Brett, this is this way. And then Brett, outside of work, was a monster, a beer drinking, girl skirt chasing monster. Whatever it took to get her, whoever I was talking to go along with my plan for the evening was okay to say. And I became a serial liar. I was horribly untrustworthy. I was becoming a very bad person. But then I meet this gal, and what interested me in her in the first place. Well, I sabotaged that good mental health job and had to move back to West Virginia. Let's not leave that part out. And I'm not back in town a couple of weeks, and I'm at a bar, and I hear this lady talking about how she lost 80 pounds. And that, for some reason, just really caught my attention. And that's how I met my first wife. And so at that time, I'll get married and life will get better. Life's going to get better if I get married, because then I'll have responsibilities, and life gets better for people when they get married. Just look, I had friends of mine, they're mostly all divorced now, but at the time, they're married, they look smiles and you see the happiness. So we got married, and Brian, there were two people who had no business marrying each other. She and I were a textbook example.
Well, it's a good thing. My dad would say that, this couple was really brutal. Both of them were brutal. My dad said, they're a great couple. And I said, really? Why do you say that? He said, well, because they kept two other people from being miserable. So that might be your thing. That's the word of wisdom for today, everyone.
I think we qualify, definitely.
But the other thing that's really odd too, you see that where one person is great and kind and nice and their spouse is an idiot, a jerk and is mean to everyone. It's like, how do they get together, right? So when you see two miserable people, you kind of understand it more than one really great person. You kind of think, wow, how's that? So anyways, sorry, man.
That's all right. It's true. What you said is very true. I hadn't thought about it that way. And for the first year of our marriage, I tried to be as good a husband as I knew to be, which I didn't have a great example to have learned from, unfortunately. And I was very much like my dad in all the wrong ways, except I didn't drink like he did. I didn't drink at home. I didn't do things at home that he did that were so destructive. I did other things that were worse. Like after the first year, then I started chasing skirts again. And all the lying just kept getting more and more out of control. And I was so disordered in my thinking, Brian, at the time, I thought it was all normal. I thought I normalized all sorts of abnormal behaviors.
You justified it. Just like everyone, right? We all do.
Okay, so I've told this woman this and this woman that, and my wife this, and the challenge is to keep it all straight. And if I got it kept and didn't get caught that time, then I'd mark in my head, I'd mark that down as a win. That's not healthy living. But all along, the mental illness was getting worse. and the worse my behavior became. And then my wife and I separated. And then I'm fooling around with another gal who later turns up pregnant. So my life became unmanageable, just totally unmanageable. I took a trip to Las Vegas when I was 29 years old, thinking, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Vegas. I'm going to win enough money, and I'm going to buy my way out of this mess. And that's exactly what I tried to do. Of course, I got out there, and the reality came in, and no, you're not. And you're too big of a coward to bet enough money to win anything in the first place, because you recognize you run out of what you got, you're going to starve. And so my wife and I separated, and I drove back like 5 or 6 days later. It's a miracle. God had to be watching over me that night, because I could barely hold my eyes open. Here I am driving cross country on I-70, 2 in the morning, cross Kansas is a good time. Because it's flat and it's a straight line and there's just nothing there to distract you. But I realized after I got back to that house and I'm looking at her and we've got a son who's a year old. And that was one of the reasons why I had to come back, was because I couldn't sleep at night because I kept hearing my kid in my head, my son in my head saying, "Where's Dad?" So I recognized I need help. And I checked myself into River Park Psychiatric Hospital in Huntington, West Virginia on the 1st of October in 1990. And spent 16 days. I was diagnosed with major depression. Nobody really explained that to me as you would want to explain that to a patient. It's one thing to have the textbook knowledge and, you know, the piece of paper says, yeah, he can talk about this. He knows what he's doing. But when you're the patient, for me, all that went out the window. You know, it was a very unpleasant experience until I started stabilizing somewhat, just due to the change in the environment, primarily. And the therapist that did the group therapy started calling me his co-therapist because I would come alive in there, because at least that was interesting to me. But as my energy level increased, then, you know, the shadowy days became a little brighter. And then they put me on Prozac. And so there was the promise of that, but they kicked me out after 16 days, not because I was well, but because of insurance. And couldn't really afford, the doctor gave me about 3 months worth of Prozac samples, and I couldn't really afford it. At that time, it was insanely expensive. I took it for a few weeks and I got a little bit better, but I couldn't afford it, so I stopped. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a better person and I'm not going to do all those things. And I lasted about 6 months before I started going back and doing all the same old crap again. But I gave up the mental health job because I lost that when I took the trip to Vegas. I grew my hair long and started playing guitar. Now that I never sabotaged it took me about 15 years to start sabotaging that, because I was reliable and I dearly love to perform. And it's not about adulation or people saying, oh, look at him, that's pretty cool. It was about the feeling of the music. Playing live music was the most pleasurable thing I ever experienced in my life. And on an aside, when you and Tro interviewed me previously and Tro asked me a question, he said, well, Brett, was music about pleasure or was it just something you loved? And I never thought about that before. And afterwards, I realized it was all about pleasure, because of the feeling I would have. It was, and while I was on stage or while we would be rehearsing or while I was engaged in musical activities, I didn't feel awful. I felt emotions. I felt inspired. I felt powerful emotions that took me to better places through music. But of course, at the end of the song, you're right where you were before the song started. So it was always a temporary fix. But finally, you know, life became unmanageable with me and my first wife, and we divorced. And even it was a horror show. My thinking at the time was, we cannot raise our son in this environment, because we were not being very nice to each other. And my thinking was, he can't grow up in this. If he grows up in this, he's going to be worse than I ever was. And so I said, we got to end this. And we did. And she started doing better and I started doing better. And then I met my current and final wife God willing, on planet life.
Amen.
She's not allowed to die before me. She's under strict orders. She cannot pass before I do. And that was, God leading me, I do believe, because if I had stayed in that environment I was in at that time, I don't think I'd have lived a year. But I also, after my present wife and I met, and we decided that, we should be under one roof together. And I had to move and change states and all this kind of stuff. And on my way there, I got this I know it was God telling me, you treat her like you treated your first wife, and you will not survive a year. And it hit me in such a way, I was like, this isn't a joke. I can't be that guy anymore. I can't be that person anymore. And I never became that version of me again, for which I'm very thankful. But I was still crazy, and it just got worse because, as I described to you previously, the Prozac helped, the meds helped for a time, but then there would be these inexplicable crashes without some, stressor that you could say, oh, your mood crashed because so-and-so died, or because you lost your job, or this. No, it was things were going great, and all of a sudden Brett's mood's in the toilet and no one knows why, kind of stuff. And fast forward to the end of 2000, my wife and I I'm in a band that sounds great. I'm having fun, but I've gained a ton of weight. I'm just 3 or 4 years away from a horrible nervous breakdown. But my wife had Friday afternoons off, and we would go and pick the kids up from school together. And we're driving to get our daughter from her middle school, and we go past this Catholic church property, and they're building a new Roman-style Catholic church. And my wife says, I'd love to go there one day and see what it's like after they finish it. Now, in college, had a minor's worth of hours in religious studies. Because while it was a lot of work, it was an easy A. Show up for class, pay attention, write the papers, give the essay answers that the professor wants. Easy A. And it was focused on culture. It was not about faith and theology. It was about churches as cultures. They'd take a community and we'd study it. And I found that interesting. So I had never been to a Catholic mass before. So when my wife had been baptized Catholic, but never taken back to mass except on high holidays, and never received confirmation or instruction or anything. And she said that, and a light went off in my head. Yeah, that'd be really interesting. So let's do that. The band I was playing in worked so much, I had to look into the future and plan a date, Brian. I'm off that weekend. We can go to mass that day. Circled it. We're going. Well, around that time, and I want you to think from this point on, I want you to imagine the Holy Spirit's got me right under the nose like that and just pulling me along, and I'm clueless, because that's exactly what's happening. After we make that determination, a week after, that's when we start reading press about this movie that Mel Gibson made called The Passion of Christ. And my initial thought when I saw the title was, okay, a crucifixion movie. Do I need to see that or not? But then I started seeing all this press where the media hated, oh, it's too violent. I'm like, well, it's a crucifixion. What do you mean? You think he was... what else would it be? But their complaints were so ludicrous that my wife and I were like, we got to go see this just because of that. And I'll never forget sitting and watching that movie as they're scourging our Lord, as they're torturing him and killing him as slowly as possible. He did that for me. And how have I rewarded him? Had an incredible, powerful impact on me for weeks and months. And then the day came, and it wasn't something I talked about. I internalized it all. It wasn't like, and I wasn't running to grab my Bible or, I'm like, okay, you got to process this. You got to work this out. You'll figure it out. But the day came to go to Mass, and we went. And I had all kinds of preconceptions about Catholicism, none of which turned out to be true. Like, A, it's a big party. No, it's not. I'm in this church was beautiful, and there's probably 200, 300 people in there, and the majority of them are on their knees, and it's dead quiet. That sacred silence that I didn't know anything about. But I was just blown away. And people weren't whispering, people weren't visiting. And I was whoa, that's pretty impressive. And then the Mass starts. And I don't know anything that's going on. But I recognized the reverence, the sacredness of what I was seeing. And the homily that the priest gave, he wasn't all that great a homilist, but what he had to say was pertinent. And at the time, our daughter was having some honesty issues, and his homily was about honesty. And I was like, boy, we picked the right day to come here for this. And I had to tell, I said, no, we did not know that was happening in advance and all this kind of thing. But I just remember I left there thinking, okay, I've been to Mass. That was really interesting. And we had a bulletin that we took home with us. And I just happened to see in the bulletin that they had 7 a.m. Mass Monday through Saturday. 2 days later, I scared my wife half to death. I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to Mass because there was something there. I didn't know what it was, but I had to figure it out. And then I had the good fortune of meeting, I called it the morning crew. There were these mostly women. They went to daily Mass every day, and then afterwards they would go to breakfast, and they recognized that I was a new face, and they were good people, and they came and introduced themselves, and there's, oh, you're new, new to Catholicism, and why don't you come eat with us? And this was over a period of weeks because I still didn't know, I didn't fully grasp it. And then I found this this website that for this TV channel, EWTN. And I started learning a little bit about Catholicism. But then this is where losing my depression was special, but this is so much better. I was always at home. I worked on the weekends. I took the kids to school during the week and picked the kids up from school. And then during the day, I'd be working on music, either writing or rehearsing. I was always doing something. But this one day, as he knocks his phone off the thing.
Hey, man, this is the way we roll over here, man. That's how it is. You're trying to lighten the mood. That's all right, God's lightening the mood for a second. That's all right.
I got to blow my nose, Brian. That's why I did that. I was reaching for tissues.
Well, hey, why
now I got to put these back in the right ear. Okay. Bear with me, sir. I'm sorry.
And I'll tell you, just to go back for a second, because this is important, but, I watched The Passion of the Christ. I tried to get out of going, I don't want to see this. I know what happened. And it impacted me hugely, too. I remember sitting there when it was over, and no one got up afterward. They just sat there. Like, everyone was kind of like, it was a special moment when you realize, wow, That is like, that's why it's so huge. What that experience you had, I had the same kind of experience too. It really made me say, man, you know, there's like, people don't realize, they make it a joke, but when you realize, man, that is what someone went through, what Jesus went through for our sins, no matter what jerks we are or whatever, you know, that speaks to people.
The ultimate innocent man. It's you're so right. So this a few months into this, you know, going to mass on Sundays, is one Monday or Tuesday afternoon, I get really agitated. I don't know what's wrong, but the notion's in my head, I need to go to the chapel at the parish. Now, Brian, they'd never mentioned a chapel. No one at any mass, no one at any breakfast had suggested there was a chapel. But I somehow knew there was one there. And I needed to go. Again, I've never parked on this side of the church before. But there it was. Little sign, such and such chapel. Now, again, I don't know much about Catholicism. I don't know that silver box on the other side of the altar, what that is. I don't know that the body, blood, and soul divinity of Jesus Christ is in there. I don't know this. But I walk in there, and thank God nobody else was in there, or I'd have probably been committed. I'm by myself, and I get down on the kneeler, just like every horrible thing I ever did just washed over me like some dark pit of hell. And I cried tears. I didn't know a human being could cry tears that big. And you know, I pity the next person. I hope that seat had dried before the next person sat in it. But all I could do was say I was sorry. And then I'm there by myself, Brian. There's nobody there. I'm not on 87 medications then. At that time, I'm just taking Prozac. Everything hadn't fallen completely apart yet. But something touched me on the shoulder. And I heard in my head, it's going to be all right. And this wave of peace filled me. It's going to be all right. And I don't have the words to articulate accurately what that experience meant to me. It means to me now. And I haven't told this story in 2 years. Let's see if I could do this without pulling my phone down.
No, this is powerful stuff, you know, because really, you know, a lot of people, I mean, you've seen my little Twitter stuff where people go, that's just emotionalism, that's not real. It's like, how do you know that? When you experience that, how do I tell you that's not real what you experience, right? All that kind of stuff.
Exactly. I
know
it was real.
You know what you know, and you can't unsee what you've seen.
And you can't unfeel what you felt. It wasn't, there was nothing, not enough prerequisites for me to have had a pseudo psychological, you know, I convinced myself something happened that didn't happen kind of experience. It was too spontaneous.
And you were an audience of one. You weren't doing a show for people. You were there by yourself, and you're doing, you know, you're called to be there, and all these things happen, and people, well, it's just a coincidence. Like, you don't know there's a chapel there, and you just know in your spirit there's a chapel there, and you know you need to go, and you're there by yourself, and you have this experience, right?
Yeah, and so I walk out of there. I'm committed. I've got to convert to Catholicism. there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then I started spending my time at EWTU to try to learn about the faith. And, then we took the classes. I can't write. What do they call that now? RCIA. Yeah. Rite of Christian Initiation. And we had great teachers and had the blessing of not only was I going through it, but my wife and my stepdaughter and stepson were going through it. And, the whole family went through it together. But I had annulment issues it took me 2 years before my wife and I could convalidate our marriage and be brought into the church. And that was a horror show in and of itself, because, okay, I'm thinking as my mental health is deteriorating, I'm doing this annulment process, and I become consumed with, okay, I'm in a state of sin. I'm trying to do the right things. What happens to me if the proverbial bread truck gets me? And as my mental health deteriorated, that became a real anchor around my neck, not because it had anything to do with reality, but just because that's what I did to myself as I got sicker.
When I think one point that's important too is I take care of a lot of pastors and people of.
Where'd you go?
Let's see here.
Okay, you're back. I'm still here.
All right. Hey, Jack, just my editor. Hey, Jack, cut out this part, and then we'll start over here. So, as a doctor, I take care of a lot of pastors and people of faith and priests and nuns, and some of them struggle with depression, and they feel sad because they think, I'm a person of faith, I shouldn't have depression. But when it's a chemical depression and stress and life and all these things that happen, I think, there's a lot of judgment in the church of people. They go, yeah, just have faith and your depression will go away. It's like, just have faith and your amputation is going to go away that you had, that kind of stuff. So obviously there's healings, but I'm just saying in general, I think there's times when we need medications. There's times when we need support and counseling, and in your case, dietary change, to figure it out. But I think the Lord gives us strength to figure out the path forward, even though we're in a quagmire at the time. We're in knee deep in mud and have to figure out how to get out.
Well, I was then led to a different parish. God brought me to the priest that I needed, who understood me, who recognized what he was dealing with right off the bat. And God bless this man. You would love to meet Father Falabella. Brian, he's 5'0". He served a tour as a chaplain in Vietnam and came home with a Bronze Star and a Silver Star for carrying wounded across the field of fire to safety.
Wow.
He was as tough a nut as you would ever want to try to see crack. He was the most beautiful homilies I've heard in my life to this day came out of that man's mouth. And he became not just a mentor, he became a confidant. And he literally kept me alive. He kept me feeling hopeful. And he kept me when I would have to write a letter to the annulment board, whatever it was called, tribunal. And it would be filled with passive aggressive because that's how I was feeling. And he would make me bring the letters to him for him to proofread before he would let me send them in. And then he would say, okay. And he would, no, you're not going to use that phrase. Then you're going to say it this way instead. And, the annulment came through, and my wife and I had our marriage convalidated. We were brought into the Catholic Church in September of 2006 or 7. About 6 months before things got really horrible, before I had the nervous breakdown, before, I mean, it was a joyful time. And to be able to go to Mass and receive the Lord was just glorious. To be able to go and to make a good confession. That was what I craved more than anything in the beginning, was to go to confession. Just tell it all. To get it all forgiven. And that's probably why I didn't kill myself later. Because I had that faith, that I had confession, I had the Eucharist, Christ in the Eucharist. Those were things that I could cling to with the promise of hope that I could believe in after what I experienced that day in the chapel. I could still hold on to that, even as crazy as my thinking got. I could hold on to that. And, didn't miss Mass, no matter how sick I got. Even the times that I would be on so much medication that I was like something out of a movie, hey, kind of guy, just so over medicated. But then after we had to leave the area and we came to Florida when things got at their worst, and then the suicidal ideation, as I described it to you, I never wanted to actively end my life. Never did. Not because of my faith primarily. You're going to risk a one-way trip to hell, because suicide, even in my state, it's a permanent solution to what's a temporary issue. Logically.
Yeah, and I think for people listening, I think this is really important, not to give up hope. And, one thing I was telling Brett before we start recording, we had a couple minutes, I was today riding my bike with a good friend of mine in Coronado, which is a beautiful little island, right in San Diego, a little peninsula there. Anyways, every time I go over that bridge, the Coronado Bridge, I just feel a peace and a rest, because I know where I'm going, and I always have great times over there with great friends. And today I was riding my bike by myself because my friend got a flat tire. So he said, go on up a little bit and come back and get me, type thing. So anyways, he delayed me a bit. But, I was sitting there by myself looking at the bridge thinking, man, I see such hope in that. And I know how many people have jumped off the mid span of that bridge because they lost all hope. They took their last breath right there where I find my peace. They had no hope. And I was like, wow, that's something. That's what drives me forward. People like you who've been to the pit of hell, in my opinion, hell in the sense of not having hope and everything's terrible. And, and now where you are now, to see that juxtaposed. And this is what I'm saying for people who have trouble understanding. When you see a changed life, when you see someone who's miserable, angry, bitter, and now every day on Twitter, that's what caught my eye. This is a joyful, happy guy. And it's, I know a lot of people like this, and their stories need to be told. That's why I'm excited to have Brett on here to share this, because people don't understand the power of hope and faith. And as a doctor, I'm telling you, if you don't have hope or faith right now, you're in big trouble. You got to look for it. You got to find that happy spot. For Brett, for many years, it was playing guitar and performing. That was his happy spot. That was something that gave him joy at the moment, at least, right? So unfortunately for a lot of us right now, and as a doctor, I will 100% tell you this, drugs, alcohol, spousal abuse, all these things are where people are turning right now because they're so frustrated, upset, and angry, and they don't have control. So I think when you have faith, this is a time of shaking of the foundation. This is a time when you say, what matters, what's really important, and for me as a doc, the other thing is I've had to tell people that they have metastatic disease. Do you think they care who the president is? Do you think they care who the next movie's coming out? Everything changes at that second, because you have a finite amount of time. And so for us, a lot of us have more time than that, hopefully. And so we can reassess what really matters and what's important. And that sounds like that's part of your journey, Brett.
Exactly. But as I got sicker, then I started getting angry at God. We went on a pilgrimage to in Alabama, to where that Basilica to the baby Jesus, where EWTN's headquarters are. And I went to all these healing masses, and I wasn't healing. And in the back of my head, well, sometimes the answer is not right now, Brett. But I didn't want to listen to that. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so I did stop going to Mass at different times for period, and because I genuinely, and I still feel this way to this day, I could never bring myself to go into Mass angry. It just feels disrespectful to me to walk into the presence of Christ angry. Disrespectful in the extreme. And so what I know now is that I was just punishing myself and denying myself what I really needed. But you couldn't tell me anything then. But the whole time, the sicker I got, there's a picture. I don't post it very often because it's really kind of frightening. I scared my mom half to death when I sent it to her because she would hear me describe how horrible I felt, but she was 1,000 miles away. She had all the memories of how I used to be and all the lies I used to tell still. She didn't really have a good picture of where I was as a person at that time. And she wasn't at all happy that I converted to Catholicism. Of course, now she's happy I found Christ, and it really doesn't matter to her how I found him. But in the back of my mind, the suicidal thoughts of, okay, you don't want to kill yourself, but if you were going to, how are you going to do it? No, I can't do that. I'm not going to condemn myself to eternal damnation. No. I might be many things, but I'm not that stupid. I'm not going to do that. Well, but if you were going to do it, if I hadn't had that to cling to, who knows what may have happened. I really can't say for sure. If I hadn't had that bit of faith that I held on to, that belief that if I do this, this is certainly going to happen. You take that out of the equation, Brian, we're probably not having this conversation. I'm just another stat. Another guy whose life was cut short by over a third for mental illness, who just couldn't take it anymore. But thanks be to God, I was blessed to have, it's another thing. God brings goodness to me in just the right order that I can receive it. He brought me the information about cannabis that I don't want to get too in, but the cannabis got me to where I was off the meds and living a little higher quality of life, but it prepared me for when I heard Jordan Peterson, describe how his daughter healed herself and how his mental health symptoms had improved by only eating beef, salt, and water. If I hadn't learned, if I'd had that information presented to me too soon, I would have dismissed it and we wouldn't be having this conversation. But God brought the information to me in the right order. Right after Jordan Peterson, Dr. Sean Baker was the next I found. Integrity. Then I found Amber O'Hearn, more integrity. Arguments there was no flaws in the logic. And because God brought me these people in that order, July 16th, 2018, I started eating animal protein and fat. And then 24 days later, my depression symptoms vanished and they haven't returned. It's like, I used to describe depression as, imagine walking around with a 50-pound anvil on your head all the time. It's there in the morning when you wake up. It wears and grinds on you all day long. And you go to bed knowing that monster is going to be there waiting on you the next day. And it makes everything harder. It makes getting a glass of water a traumatic experience. It's just awful. And when that's gone and you're filled with nothing but happiness and joy, I'm the most fortunate human being I know of because of that. Not because I'm special, because I'm not. I'm a flawed, sinful man. But I've learned I don't have to suffer anymore. And that's one of the reasons why I share my story, is so that others can learn. You're not a genetic mistake. You're not broken. You just were taught to eat inflammatory materials instead of nutritious food. And you developed a sugar addiction, which inflamed your brain. and we don't operate as optimal human beings when our brain's inflamed. But here's what I've learned, and I want to share this now before it gets away from me. When we're properly fed, when we're properly rested, when we're loved on by somebody else, just a little bit, our natural, effortless state is happiness. I experience that every day. I thank God for that every day. I'm not only, oh, I'm sitting around, really, happiness really takes an effort. No, it doesn't. It does not take an effort. I'm a lazy guitar player. If it took effort, I would find a way still to complain about it. No, it doesn't. And people need to know that. And I've met hundreds of folks like me now because of the platform at MeetRx. And I coach this way of eating, and I facilitate 2 mental health meetings a week. And I've seen dozens and dozens of people come through these meetings at the beginning of the journey when they were just like I was. And then you see the light go on in their eyes when they grasp the hope that you've handed out for them to take, and to watch them transform just like I did. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I realized that with my journey with low carb and keto and seeing people depression, anxiety, stress, that's what excited me about it. Reversing diabetes, cool, getting off meds. But when I see someone's life better and they say, oh my gosh, I'm joyful, I'm happy. When I saw you online, when I saw the testimonials from Sean Baker, and I thought, yeah, as a doctor, I'm like, okay, he's probably pushing the agenda, right? At first you think that. And then I started talking to people and they're like, my life changed, man. I am better. And I see that and I see connection. There's definitely something to the carnivore diet that does something with mood. And I've been saying that if you go back to the Low Carb MD podcast from the very beginning, I'm like, look, I can't argue that. I don't know why necessarily. It could be choline deficiency. It could be this vitamin D. I don't know what it is. But what I do see is a lot of the carnivores are very peaceful. They kind of live your life and I'll live mine. And like someone like you who's very joyful in the morning and excited, I saw that in Tyler Todd, who he's not a carnivore, but he has that joy. There's people that you see out there that they have this joy. He was on. I had him on the podcast, and because he was in the pit too. I think when you get out of the pit, when you go through what we're going through now, the good times are going to be that much better. You can appreciate it so much better. And I know the reason you're so passionate and so happy and so joyful is because you've been in the pit and you know what it's like. And when you're not in the pit anymore, you're very thankful. When you're as thirsty as can be, that little glass of water is the only thing you seek after. And that's what makes you happy, right? And that's what gives you refreshment and joy and faith. Nutrition. That's why I did this podcast, because it's not just about what you're eating. It's about having that love, the support, the friendship, the getting sleep, taking care of yourself, not being in this inflamed state all the time. We definitely know that. We know that inflammation can cause depression, anxiety, stress, neurotransmitter problems. What we eat can cause that also. So, why not hit the whole organism, right? Like make yourself as healthy as you can. If you're eating healthy but you don't exercise at all and you're bitter at the world, we got to work on those other things. Ben Bickman, who I love and respect a lot, he was, look, Brian, 5 things, right? 5 things. What a great thing. Look, don't stress yourself out. Don't run around like an idiot. Eat real food, right? Exercise regularly. Don't smoke or drink to excess. All these things that we're kind of talking about. And basically, watch your stress levels and take care of your friends and family and all that. So I think a lot of us right now are struggling. There's a lot of people struggling. I see it day in and day out, right? The effects of, just not having as much as other people. And then my benefit, I just tweeted about it yesterday, is I've been to some of the worst places. El Salvador is one of the most dangerous, scary places I've ever been in my life. And even there, in the worst slum that I went to, there were happy, joyful people that just, hey, look, they don't need to drive a Rolls Royce. They're happy and joyful, and they love their friends, family, and they take care of each other. I don't talk about this a lot, but every Christmas Eve I go, they make me go now. My kids, wife, we go to a park and there's homeless people, and we bring warm socks and shoes and, things to help food, a hot cup of coffee, whatever it is. And it's how God works, right? My daughter goes, I picked up a couple nail clippers. I'm like, nail clippers? We're there. And my wife said, hey, is there anything you need? The guy says, nail clippers. A homeless guy, he wants nail. I'm like, we look at each other. You've got to be kidding me. He goes, yeah, I've had this hangnail bugging me. Here you go. And he starts crying. Nail clippers, right? Or just a cup of coffee, whatever it is. Or, like you needed someone to say, hey, look, Brett, change what you're doing lifestyle wise, right? And it makes a difference. So people who say lifestyle doesn't make a difference, they're wrong. If they say faith doesn't make a difference, they're wrong. Because these are things that help get us through those hard times. And one other thing while I'm on my soapbox for a second is, because when you and I get together, it's dangerous. But, this year I watched you lost your father. You lost your dog of 10 years, which is a great friend. I went through that not too long ago. And, friends on Twitter were very kind and decent. People were so decent and kind and reached out, and it helped. I was like, that's nice of people just to say what their experience, what they went through, and support you and all this stuff. But I watched you go through that, and I said, that's a man of faith, because there's no way you go through these things and still be joyful and still have a peace. And that peace is that peace feeling is what people just don't understand who haven't experienced that.
Well, there's so many things about that I want to say. I try to be coherent about it. When I helped take care of my father. My father had type 2 diabetes for over 20 years. He was a committed sugar addict. And I didn't know what I now know. And by the time I learned what I learned about sugar addiction, that type 2 diabetes is reversible through diet, etc., he was already too far gone. And he was already consumed with dementia. His kidneys were failing. End-stage renal disease is what ultimately took his life. But I had the privilege of spending the last 2.5 weeks of his life helping to take care of him with my mom, my sister. And it was very, very, very difficult, because with the same house I grew up in, a house where the walls just reek with horrible memories. It was never a happy home. My mom says it was a happy home when her grandfather used to live there. But the 40 plus years that we were there, it was never, that mom and dad were there, that dad was on this earth living in it. It was never a happy home. And I want to say this about my dad. My dad did get his life turned around in many ways. He did stop drinking. He found Christ in his manner and a church, and became an elder. And he helped some people. I don't want people to think that he died an awful monster. No, he died a horrible death that was so unnecessary. We all are going to die, but we don't have to make it as awful as possible by the choices that we make when we're relatively sane and sound. And no doctor told him that type 2 diabetes was reversible on top of it, all that. But I saw a lot of beautiful things. I saw the love of his family expressed in ways that I'd never seen before, that I could appreciate, that I will take to my grave as visions, memories, beautiful memories. But I also saw a lot of horrible things. I saw the end of what the end game is for type 2 diabetes. And it's not something that if people could see what I saw, and what I tried not to describe too graphically on Twitter, but some of it came through, I'm sure, is a horror show. And so unnecessary. But through it all, I never had a bad day. I never felt like, it was sad. There was sadness, but sadness is not depression. My dad was dying. Of course you're going to be sad. But I knew that would end. I knew grief was coming, but grief is finite if we allow ourselves to express it in a healthy manner. Even the morning after he passed, and my mom, I wrote a song about it, which you've heard. We're in the kitchen. I'm fixing me breakfast, and he's got that horrible loud breathing I can't remember the clinical name for it off the top of my head. I'm just a guitar player. I'm not a doctor. But it was really loud, and you become desensitized to it until it stops. And he was gone. That was sad. But I remember after, the funeral home came and picked up his remains, and it was just Mom and I there. And she was throwing me and my sister out. She was going to keep Dad to herself for his last couple of days. And I already had, there was already a plane waiting on me to leave that morning. And I remember getting on the plane and sitting here. This is horrible, but I'm not crazy anymore. This is a good day. And I got to come home and see my wife, and, Dad was gone. He passed peacefully in his own home that he'd been in, that he'd literally rebuilt from the ground up. And most folks don't get that privilege. It was a good day. He was not suffering anymore. And we weren't suffering watching him suffer anymore. I haven't had a bad day since I lost my depression symptoms. I've had challenges, but there's not been a bad day. Every day's been better than the day before. And I want to talk about my appreciation for faith now, without the crazy, without the inflammation. I used to be a walking, talking ball of fear. I was always anxious. I was always worried about this. Well, if I figure that out, then there's this. And I figured that, well, then there's this problem. Oh my God, what am I going? I was constantly like that. I know that it's kind of like I teach the way I teach carnivory. If you follow the rules, you get to reap. If you follow the directions, you get to reap the rewards. If I follow the teachings of Christ, life is easier. It's not, that doesn't mean there aren't challenges. It doesn't mean the car starts every time you put the key in. Or if the car breaks down, it doesn't mean there's always money to fix it. Things still happen. But I'm not crazy, and Jesus loves me. And I've received him. I'm forgiven. My refrigerator's full of meat. My wife loves me. We have a life now. She's carnivore too. Oh my gosh, we could do a whole episode just on what it does for a marriage. It just boggles the mind. Life is and we live in a dumpy little old bungalow home that we're thankful to have because the roof doesn't leak. We don't want for anything. I don't need anything. All of my needs are surpassingly met. And I know the source of all of that is God Almighty, because it all comes from him. And I thank him every night in my prayers for teaching me about meat and water, because it has enabled me. He's blessed me to be able to share these experiences. And I know you know what this is like, because I know you get cards and letters from patients thanking you for saving them, for pointing them in the direction to where their misery was ended. And I know what that feels like. It's priceless. People talk about, I'd rather get one of those a month than have $1 million.
Yeah, I think people look at that, they miss out. To be honest, honestly, this is kind of funny and you may have seen me tweet about it. 3 days ago, I woke up and told my wife, honey, you know what? Look, I took a huge pay cut. I'm starting my own practice. There's startup costs. I had to invest a lot. And Low Carb MD, believe it or not, we've had 3 million downloads. We have 200 Patreon supporters. It's a net loss for us. I put money into low carb MD, and then I started this podcast, and I'm self-funding it because I believe in it. But I'm covering all the costs. I'm like, honey, I don't know how long I should do this. What do you think? She goes, Brian, you keep doing it. Just keep doing it. We'll figure it out. We'll make ends meet. We're not struggling, right? And the next 2 days after that, that day and the next day, I get two patients tell me, you know what? You saved my life with your podcast. I said, oh, low carb MD. And they said, no, life's best medicine. That's got me through these hard times. Next day, the same thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to stop this thing, but because your story will save lives. Because there's people right now saying, I'm done. I cannot take this anymore. There's people who don't have depression as a baseline, who are positive, good people who've just had the restaurant closed down. I have a good friend of mine. I'm looking in his eyes and he's, in tears. He's like, I want to leave the country. I'm done. He goes, I've worked my butt off and the frustration, the anger, and he's a great person, great Italian food, which he gets mad at me for not eating the pasta and bread, but he goes for making tons of money and he's what's he worried about? His employees. He's not worried about himself. He goes, I have enough money. That's not the point. The point is all of my employees are suffering and I'm paying them and I'm trying to help them. And, those kind of things, depression, anxiety, stress, and he's had friends kill themselves that own small businesses, and that is the side of this thing we don't, that we don't appreciate enough. There are costs outside of that, but we diverge. For you to end up on a positive note, what's life's best medicine, Brett?
It starts with what we eat, and you need to believe in something that's bigger than yourself. Because if you don't believe in something that's bigger than yourself, you're going to have a frustrating time. Without that belief, without faith in something, I think trying to find hope is almost impossible. There's got to be something, there's got to be a source that the hope comes from. And I think this is the problem that people, there's no such thing as God. Prove it to me. Okay, explain to me. You're going to tell me that was just coincidences that led me to that chapel. I don't think so. You're going to tell me that it's a coincidence that I just happened as my screwed up mental state to get the information about the carnivore way of eating in exactly the right amount from the right people at the right time that I could process it. You're telling me that was just an accident? I don't believe that. People say, you can't prove that God exists. He's everywhere. Why did the flowers bloom? It's photosynthesis. There's all these processes. Yeah, but where did the first seed come from? It started someplace. 1 + 1 = 2, right, Brian? Where did the 1 come from? We didn't always know about 1 or 2. Where did it come from? It came from someplace. Geez, I wonder where. You've got to believe in something bigger than yourself, and you've got to not eat inflammatory things so that you can process and think as you were designed, that your brain is not inhibited from performing by inflammation or insulin resistance,
Yeah. Hey, Brett, man, it's awesome. Thanks for joining us, for me and everyone listening. And that's life's best medicine. Figuring out where you get your peace. Where you find the place that gives you purpose. And I think a lot of us are so distracted that we never think about it. We never think about it until our friend dies, or we don't think about it until we're sick. We just say, I'll just live my life. I'll check my Twitter feed. I know how many times I've checked my Twitter feed before I've thought about God. And now I'm having a awakening in a way. And I think a lot of us are. I think in a way where you say, what really matters? Do I need to look at Twitter feed, or should I sit and talk to my daughter for a few minutes? Do I need to look at Facebook, or I want to be with the friend that's with me at the restaurant or before when we had restaurants? Those kind of things, and look and say, is it really important for me to have that Ferrari? Is it really important for me to be happier? I don't have a huge house and Brett doesn't have a huge house, but my house is filled with joy and happiness and peace. I'll take that any day over the biggest mansion with fancy marble countertops and whatever you want to have. It means nothing if you don't have relationship and love and peace in your life. So that is life's best medicine. Take care of yourself, take care of others, and thank you for listening. I know we went long, but it's well worth it. And please share this with friends. Please share it with friends who are struggling with depression, anxiety, and stress right now. And there's tons of them out there. Trust me. That's why we're doing the podcast. So be blessed. Have a great week, and thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information. And hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.